Here's a question. On a weekly basis, where, in what setting or context, is the most voice training done? If your answer is the private lesson, think again. A 2019 study by Chorus America reported that 54 million U.S. adults and children were singing in a choir across an estimated 270,000 ensembles. The choir rehearsal, not the studio, is where the majority of all voice training is occurring. Whatever the average amateur choir member knows about singing, they learned it not in a voice lesson from a voice trainer, but in a choir rehearsal from a choir director. There's nothing wrong with this, provided the director is well-informed and intentional. But what if they aren't? And if so, what can be done? That's what today's episode is all about. Welcome to the Voice Science Podcast, where we explore the science behind singing and teaching. I'm Drew, and today's episode comes from our contributor, Timothy Wilds, and it is written for two audiences at once, choir directors and choir members, because the same conversation is useful to both. Whether you're standing in front of the ensemble or sitting in it, there is something here for you. Let's get into it. When you begin to realize that more singers learn about singing in choir rehearsal than in private lessons, you begin to understand how vital it is for choir directors to be knowledgeable and to train their singers well. If you think that's overstating it, allow me to share some takeaways from a recent conversation I had with someone who has spent years singing in amateur volunteer choirs, a singer who has had little to no private vocal instruction. Their choral experiences were found at school, all-state, church, and community choirs. I asked them to tell me what they carry with them in terms of the basic operating procedures of the voice. All of their recollections centered on concepts related to breathing and the use of the diaphragm. Need a big breath? Breathe from the diaphragm. Need to hold a long note? Activate the diaphragm. Need to sing louder? Engage the diaphragm to increase airflow. Need to sing softer? Use the diaphragm to decrease airflow. This singer's memories of decades-old rehearsal content illustrate exactly how singers can trustingly accept a director's instructions as fact and adopt them as a basis for good vocal production. Take the diaphragmatically dominant responses above. Other than the thread of truth that all breathing is diaphragmatically initiated, the remaining responses are at odds with evidence-based vocal science. To brush up on what the diaphragm can and cannot do, I urge you to listen to the Voci episode specifically on this topic. In conveying the story of one choir member's voice training experience via rehearsal, I am compelled to make the following observation, with apologies to Stephen Sondheim. Careful the things you say. Singers will listen. Words spoken by someone in authority carry an often unquestioned sense of veracity. Be one a politician, a preacher, or a choir director, your words are received by most as authoritative and trustworthy. Let that thought be a caution to us all. So far, I have argued that choir rehearsals are the primary place most amateur singers learn the craft of singing. And in doing so, I have implied that the onus is on the choir director to be adequate for the task. Does that mean I think all choir directors need to be credentialed and experienced voice trainers? As much as I wish that were true, I realize it is an unrealistic dream. I do think we should expect choir directors to understand and demonstrate basic vocal production in a way that amateur choir members can do likewise. The fact remains that not all choir directors have had voice training or even taken a course in choral conducting. Often, particularly in religious settings, the role of choir director is an add-on to the primary work of playing the organ or piano to accompany hymns, songs, and other service music. As for the choral directing aspect of the job, they are probably fashioning their approach after the experiences they had under directors in their past. Odds are, They are merely transferring to their singers the same information which they themselves received whilst singing in a choir. As for the information being passed, it is likely a mixed bag of everything from true to false. Based on my observations, I fear that the bulk of what is in the bag is unclear and therefore not useful to the amateur singer. But this is not only a small volunteer church choir issue. I can report having witnessed an equal level of vocal ignorance in music education and musical theater programs. At a middle school, limited funds required the band director to also direct the chorus. The pianist for the school musical was expected to coach the singers. In both cases, economic pressures were a factor, and I appreciate that, at the very least, a person with some musical training was placed in charge. However, securing a musical adult to be in the room is not the same as securing someone with the skill sets needed to train the human voice. So whether the choir context is a church, school, or theater, when it comes to voice training, remember this: the greater the deficit, the greater the need. In other words, the less your average singer knows about the voice, the more the director needs to know in order to equip them. Earlier, I observed that the amateur choir member may be burdened with instructions or information that is unclear and therefore not useful. The singer struggles to apply what the director has said, which frustrates both parties. I would like to unpack some of the most common instructions given by the average choir director. The analysis will take a tripartite shape. 1. The instruction the choir hears. 2. The goal behind the instruction. 3. A test the singer can use to know if they are achieving that goal. Instruction: open your mouth and drop your jaw. What the director is going for here is a traditional Western European choral sound, round, spacious, characterized by vertical openness in the oral cavity. Directors often use visual prompts to get there. Images like singing with an egg or a table tennis ball in your mouth are very common. Here's a way to find out if you are meeting that goal. This one is done by observing the amount of distance between the back molars. To perform it, use your fingers against the outside of your cheek and lightly push your cheek inward towards the area where the back molars reside. While biting down, do the test and notice the absence of any space between the back molar. Now, allow your index finger, nail up, pad down, to locate the back molars and separate them just enough to fit your index finger snugly. Next, allow your index finger and thumb pads together to locate the back molars and separate them enough to fit both snugly. Repeat the sequence while focusing on inhaling and exhaling. Notice how the sound of respiration changes. Repeat once more, and this time singing a mid-range ah vowel. Notice the sound change moving through the progression. In my opinion, the one-finger option is the preferred amount of oral cavity opening because it promotes the most unobstructed flow of air and sound. You might consider this the Goldilocks position. It fits just right. The index finger and thumb option illustrates how easily singers can bypass reaching the ideal sound. Notice also that it causes the tongue to flatten and retract, and the larynx to drop further, resulting in an overly dark timbre. This combination produces what some call a back sound. Returning to the visual prompts, the egg and the table tennis ball. These images can be useful if not allowed to run amok. In the extreme, each one fosters a very low and retracted tongue, which can lead to a swallowed sound. Knowing when enough adjustment is optimal is essential for success. Too much of even a good thing can miss the mark. Instruction: open your throat, create more backspace. Once again, these are verbal pathways toward the same destination. the desired Western European choral sound. And they do give the singer the impression that there are hidden spaces behind the mouth waiting to be opened. Before getting to ways to find an open pharynx, throat, let's gain some perspective with a few pharyngeal facts. The pharynx in an adult is around 4¾ to 5 inches long. It is a non-rigid pipe, a musculomembranous, highly flexible tube that rather effortlessly moves air, liquid, and food through its channel. It is elliptical in shape, running from the base of the skull to the 6th cervical vertebrae, essentially from the level of the nasal cavities to the level of the cricoid cartilage of the larynx. It is shaped like a funnel. The widest part, the nasopharynx, located behind the nasal passageway, is around 1 1/3 to 2 inches in transverse diameter. The mid-region, the oropharynx, is a bit narrower and sits behind the oral cavity. The pharynx reaches its southern destination at the level of the larynx. The region called the laryngopharynx, where it has narrowed to just over 1/2 inch, significantly less than half its starting size. Here, it ends and either progresses to the esophagus or the trachea. Keep in mind that these are transverse measurements at rest. When we inhale, the pharyngeal walls dilate, creating a stable, open tube through which air flows. When we swallow, they constrict to guide liquid and food to the esophagus. The pharynx is unique in its flexibility, changing diameter as needed per the task at hand. Here is how to find it. Take a satisfying breath, one that feels full but not like you are about to burst. Once you have, take a sensory picture of the expansion of your torso. Now, take a similar breath and slowly exhale without losing the expansion. This is breath management in a nutshell. Next, repeat the same exercise and this time let your attention go to your throat. Take a satisfying breath. Don't overtank the air. Notice what you perceive as the throat opening. Take another sensory picture of what you're experiencing. Now, take another breath and let the air escape while actively recreating the feeling of openness you captured in that sensory picture. Unless you are an anomaly, you will probably find holding on to torso expansion or pharyngeal openness a challenge while exhaling. Everyone does. But with practice, you can learn the process. Let me again underscore the importance of not sabotaging yourself by taking oversized breaths. They can easily set you up for disappointment because they skew your perception of the actual size of the spaces, which in turn can lead the singer to go beyond the desired goal. I once worked with a student whose vocal production was excessively swallowed. When I asked what he was thinking to produce that sound, he told me the story of a choir director under whom he had sung, a director who asked that the sound be produced as if someone was lowering a hot light bulb down his throat. I would never say those words to any student, but I have to say the image did exactly what was intended. I tell that story as a reminder that a director's words are powerful. Use them with care. Instructions. Raise your soft palate. As with the two that preceded it, this instruction is a means by which to achieve the traditional Western European sound for a majority of standard choral music. Here's a test to help you find it. Create the nasal consonant sound. This is done when the dorsum of the tongue and the velum are touching. Now inhale and notice that all the air is flowing in through the nose. This is happening because the velopharyngeal port, the space between the velum and the posterior wall of the nasopharynx, is closed due to the positioning of the tongue and velum. Next, inhale again as before, but halfway through the inhalation, allow the dorsum to relax away from the velum. The sound you hear may remind you of a faint, gentle snore. You may also notice the uvula, the part of the velum that hangs down like a stalactite, feels cooler due to the air now moving through the oral cavity as the velopharyngeal port opens. Repeat the test, this time singing a modest pitch on an ng. Now skip to the end of the test, the place where the velum feels the rush of cooling air, and sing an ah. This is singing with a raised, soft palate. This is the Goldilocks positioning your choir director hopes you find. Perhaps you're thinking, but I feel like I didn't do anything. One certain truth about singing is this: little adjustments make big differences. Other dependable prompts for lifting the velum include the feeling of a surprised gasp, biting into an apple, and lifting your upper lip to show your vampire teeth. They are powerful visuals that never disappoint. You can try to go further, to raise your soft palate until it comes out the top of your head, but doing so is a fool's errand. Keep in mind that the average velopharyngeal distance in an adult is around 3/8 of an inch, the diameter of a standard wooden pencil or 3 stacked dimes. Here again, in an attempt to obey and please the director, singers can overdo it, which tends to create new problems to solve. Notice what an exaggerated raised soft palate posture does to your tongue position. The tongue is likely to drop and draw the back of the tongue into the oropharynx, which only serves to block the flow of sound through the pharynx. You can liken it to putting a cork in a bottle and wondering why nothing pours out. The 3 tests we have covered today are a starting point, a way to know in the rehearsal and in the practice room whether you are meeting the goal your director has in mind. But consistent improvement beyond the rehearsal room means knowing what to work on between sessions. That is exactly what Practice Paths at voicescience.org is built for. It builds your practice session around how your voice is actually performing today, not where you hope it is, not what you did last week. You show up, and it figures out the rest. There's a full 30-day free trial, no credit card required, and you'll be in the tools within the first 2 minutes. Check it out at voicescience.org. In closing, I hope this episode has illuminated several things. The first is simply the scope of the issue. More singers learn the craft of singing in choir rehearsals than in private lessons, which means the choir director's role in vocal training is both larger and more consequential than is often acknowledged. From that follows a responsibility. Directors need to equip themselves to meet the voice training needs of their singers, particularly when the ensemble is composed of average amateur volunteers. For their part, choir members should feel empowered to let their director know when there is a gap between what is being asked and what the choir is able to deliver. That gap is often the result of undertraining on the director's side, not a failure on the choir's. And finally, because directors must address vocal production in broad, generic terms out of necessity, given the divergent skill levels in any given room, singers need to know what the goal is and how to test whether they have reached it. That is what this episode has hoped to give you. Here at Voci, we have resources for both the choir director and the choir member, and we are here for you. If this episode gave you something useful, pass it along to a director you sing under or a singer you direct. The conversation it might start is worth having. Until next time, keep singing smart.